The eviction notice was stuck to the windows of the house where my family and I lived. Everything seemed to be tumbling down. Ostracised by everyone I knew and uncertain of the next step. The sheriff came to escort us out of the house. I thanked him profusely. Why? Because today was my escape. I'd persisted in the belief that the kids and I would be free, and today we were. Free of barbed wire fences, locked gates, and people watching our every move. How? Why? What happened? They're great questions you're wondering now. And these questions saved my life and cracked an opening in one of Australia's largest doomsday cults. I'll share with you today how questioning everything can help save your life and possibly even your soul. I was brought up in a strict religious sect that later was deemed a cult. I was cut off from the world, formal education and news. I wanted freedom. So after I was 18, I married the tutor that was teaching my siblings and I. He was 31. A few years later, he sold the house from underneath us and moved us to a religious community where we were praying, eating and sharing everything with 180 other people. And where I went on to birth 9 children behind barbed wire fences and locked gates in what turned out to be my second cult. So I went from one straight into another. But that was to be expected. It was the way I'd grown up, and it was the only thing that I knew. So that's what I did. So I fell into familiar patterns, which is not unusual when I speak about cults around the world. There are many people that tell me about their friends, family and loved ones that are in cults. Are you aware that 70% of cult members are women? And here in the UK, there are some 500 cults, which equal about 100,000 people who are members of cults. And whilst that may not seem to be a significant number amongst 62 million population, that's the size of Wakefield in Yorkshire. In the US, there are like 5,000 cults, and in my country of Australia, there's like 3,000. So for me, following all the rules of praying, fasting, working were nothing short of a headache. But we weren't allowed any kind of pain relief, any relief at all. We had to sacrifice everything for a higher place in heaven. But the thing is, this kind of lifestyle makes you numb. And I realised that I was only existing, not living. And there was this little voice inside of me saying, Claire, this is wrong. And I was asking the questions. Is life meant to be lived in endless sadness? Endless sacrifice, giving everything and getting nothing back? I couldn't do it anymore. My spirit was exhausted. And that's when I asked the questions. Why is this a situation? What am I going to do? How am I going to change it? So I was living in this loving community but not feeling the love at all. In fact, it was stressful with all the sacrificing, the working, the handing my will over to the superior, doing what they wanted. This was not how I envisioned my life at all. And we were constantly told, the world is ending, so don't get used to luxuries. Once we're the only survivors thanks to the black plastic on our windows and barbed wire fences, there will be no TVs or movies. And yet the leaders were doing exactly as they wanted, using the TV, movies, internet, because apparently they could use it without having the evil come in. The longer that we lived there, the more angry, frustrated and unhappy I became with all the restrictions. There came a day where I threw all caution to the wind. I didn't give a hoot about the consequences. I started pushing the envelope just that little bit too hard. I became quietly resistant to the directives. I questioned the cult leaders. I sent them letters. My husband didn't like or agree with any of my actions. Remember me saying that the internet was a web to entangle the world? Well, my husband had a secret addiction, gambling. And as with all gamblers, they find a way to sneak it in, like the computer and the internet that he secretly set up. He didn't want me to say anything to the leaders because he didn't want us to be thrown out of the community. He was ready to throw me under the bus. It was time for me to act. So one day when he was out, I went to the cupboard where I knew he kept the cash that he drew out of the bank. And firstly, I could only find a few notes of money. And then I kept searching, and my patience was rewarded when I finally pulled out of a pocket a massive wad of cash. And I sat down on my bedroom floor, and I had all this cash around on the floor, and I counted it. I'd never seen so much money in all my life. It was 20,000 Australian dollars, or a touch over 12,000 British pounds. And I'm sitting there and I'm asking myself, why am I barely scraping by? I've got a family of 10 to feed, and I'm grinding unmilled sacks of wheat in order to be able to make my daily meal allowance of 84 cents US, 67p. And I'm asking myself, why am I living a life of obedience in misery? So I've reached out and I've made the leaders angry. I've been ostracised, whispered about, and not allowed to associate with anybody. But members later told me that it was my letters of inquiry, my first defiance, that made them wonder, that made them question, and then made them leave to testify against the exploitation and pedophilic activity in the community. But I was still stuck there with 8 kids and a vow. So I'm sitting there holding this money in my hand, and I'm wondering what I'm going to do next. I don't have a bank account to hide it in. And even if I did, I felt like my husband would threaten me to get to it. So I did the next best thing. I found a biscuit tin and I stuffed all that money inside, taped it tightly closed, marched down to the shed, got myself a shovel and walked into the bushland next door and dug a deep hole underneath a log and buried the tin deep inside. And that day there was a change. I stepped into my power. I figured that a step in any direction is better than none. Because once I took that money, there was no turning back. The old Claire was gone forever. And even though I had no idea of what to do, how to do it, who to turn to, I was bound and determined that the kids and I would leave that cult. So when my husband was out, I acted in secret. I searched for rentals in the paper. I opened up my own bank account. I went through all our possessions and threw out the junk that was for the apocalypse. And the kids and I, instead of being ready for the end of the world, we were prepared for the end of the world as we knew it. So 10 years on, our lives have completely flipped. I left that husband. The kids and I moved to interstate, to a new city, to start a fresh new life. I met and married my Englishman. I imported him. And now, life looks a whole lot brighter. And so for you, the audience, you can use those same 3 questions to ask yourself what you want in your life. Like, why is your life like this? How do you want to live it? What changes do you want to make? Listen to that inner voice and be brave and step past all of your fear, your boundaries and your restrictions to live a life that inspires generations. Thank you.